dive into our topic for tonight, how many of you, I'm sure I can predict somewhat what your answer will be, but how many of you have had family members or close friends who are seriously ill, as in very seriously ill? Would you agree that it does not only affect the person who is tremendously sick? I'm sure that we can all recognize that when people get sick, it also affects more than that, just that person and the one that is suffering from the disease. The close friends are affected, the family is affected, people need to help with caring for that person. It affects finances, it affects everything else, right? So what we're learning about is not just important for us to avoid the discomfort of disease, it is something that affects our societies in general. And I'm hoping that we are putting together some practical ideas. Now, I'm trying to just quickly gauge. I don't think we've got all that many new faces here. Anybody who is here for the first time tonight? You're here for the first time tonight. We're glad to have you with us. We're going to have to check whether the rest have got any memory of what we've spoken about so far, which is not really testing them, it's actually testing whether I can explain things properly. So if you had to summarize what you've learned so far, how would you share? I don't think everybody's necessarily been here for both of the previous talks. What did we talk about in the first night? Blood circulation. How important is blood circulation?
Essential.
Absolutely essential. For which parts of the body? Every part of the body, okay. Can you remember what the phrase was that we learned from the Bible about blood? That verse in Leviticus?
The life of
Absolutely, the life of the flesh is in the blood. And I think people don't always realize that that is an anatomical teaching that is embedded into the Bible. So we're learning about that. What was last night about? Apart from Harry's knees. We were learning about the bones and how the skeletal system and the joints can actually be a bit of an alarm system for us, right? And we're wanting to hinge on that and make sure that we keep that in the back of our minds, that exactly like we've seen last night, that system of the joints and the bones is not just there to keep us upright and help us to walk, but when things go wrong with that system, it is a telltale sign that there might be something wrong with other things as well. We're still experimenting. It's not just, oh, there's a problem in my joint. Would you all agree from everything we discussed last night that we can safely say the problem in the joint is a sign of something bigger that is wrong? Okay? Now, for those who weren't here last night, those who were here, what did we summarize? If somebody has chronic joint problems, or the bones are getting brittle, or they have osteoporosis, or one of those things, the different kinds of arthritis, what did we say? Where are we going to dig to go find the issues? Where is the underlying problem most likely?
The marrow?
The life of the flesh is in the blood, right? So most likely we're dealing with a problem that has some connection with the fact that either there are too many impurities in the blood, or the blood isn't circulating properly, and that can affect things in various different ways. Okay. So we're wanting to expand on that a little bit tonight. We have started seeing that blood is really important. But we have also spoken about the fact that blood carries necessary things. We know that it carries oxygen and nutrients and all of those things, but we've also focused on the fact that blood, to some extent, has a role to remove toxins, and it interacts with various other systems. So that's what we're zoning in for tonight, is just getting a bit of a broader idea of how the body actually maintains pure blood. Because I think you will agree with me, how many of us don't have any exposure to anything toxic ever? I'm the only one with my hand up. And I can assure you that I don't have either. Have you taken some breaths today? Do we have some pollution and toxins in the air? Can we stop breathing just because there's some poisons in the air? Obviously not. So our bodies do get exposed to toxins, and praise the Lord, He has made sure that the body has some systems in place to help us clear those toxins out. And we want to understand them better because it gives us information about how we can support that system. So Healthy Harry may have had some difficulties or some symptoms. It might not necessarily be his joints, it could be other symptoms. But let's quickly summarize what the different parts of his body are that are involved in detoxing or getting rid of toxins. These are just the basics. There are just a few of those systems, and I think most of this is maybe common knowledge, but we were actually mentioning earlier on that sometimes we don't even know what some of these organs do. If I had to ask you to talk to a 3-year-old, how would you tell them what is the role of the kidneys? What do the kidneys do? Okay, so they filter the blood. That's a very good way to look at it, and we're not zoning in on the kidneys too much tonight, but absolutely, the kidneys literally have little cells that act like a sieve, and they help to filter the blood, so absolutely. And in the process, they produce urine, which is where a lot of those toxins are shed out of the body, right? Okay. They play a role in various other things, absolutely. The kidneys play a very big role in blood pressure. It has a role in our salt levels and the blood pH, which relates to what we were talking about last night. So the kidneys play a role in maintaining pure blood. Would you agree that we can say that? All right. What about if you had to say to somebody what the role of the skin is? Why do we have skin apart from hiding everything that looks gross?
Keep our bodies together.
Keeps a lot of the stuff together. It definitely appears that way. What else does the skin do?
It allows your body to breathe and eliminate toxins.
For sure, the skin has
And absorb.
absolutely. So we mentioned briefly about this last night, but it's important for us to recognize that the skin is a permeable membrane, as they would say. The skin allows for things to go into the body and to go out of the body. So we can absorb things through the skin, and we can also get rid of toxins through the skin. Absolutely. Now, maybe before we even jump to something else, as a matter of interest, is the skin going to absorb selectively? Does everything that I touch go into my body? It's a bit of a trick question, right? Because it seems like it might be yes, and it seems like it might be no. When you're sitting in the bath water doesn't get less, right? So it doesn't necessarily absorb everything like a sponge. However, it is important for us to think about what you just mentioned, because there's an element of truth to that. There is something that goes through the skin and into your blood from everything that you're going to touch. So, of course, if I'm touching my car's metal framework or something like that, I'm not necessarily absorbing things, everything that I'm touching is not going to disappear, but I am going to absorb things through the skin, and especially when it comes to liquids and things that are fat-based, they go into the skin very easily. So you're not absorbing your bath water as such, but when you put hand cream on, which is oil-based, that goes into the skin more easily, right? What about chemicals? Do they go into the skin? So would you agree that the skin, even though it is on this list of ways for the body to get rid of things, the skin is also an entry point? Would you all agree to that? And I often say to people, if you don't want something to be in your blood, if you wouldn't eat it, and if you wouldn't want it in your blood, you should think carefully about whether or not you want to touch it. Because we work with all sorts of things. We work with chemicals. We have chemicals and toxins that are in almost every one of our skincare products, our household cleaning products, all of those things. And the vast majority of that actually does absorb to some extent and get into the blood system. So, with that being said, the skin also has a role to get rid of toxins, and when we are sweating, we are going to be sweating out some toxins through the skin. Have you heard that verse in the Bible in Genesis where after Adam and Eve sinned, then God had a discussion with them, and then He said to them, "Now you're going to be eating from the sweat of your brow." Is that familiar to everybody? I listened to that verse as well as a child, and I thought, this sounds like a very cruel God. It sounds like He was just giving out this annoyingly harsh punishment, because I hate sweating. I absolutely hate that feeling of feeling sticky and sweaty. It's an awful thing. So I used to read that as a child, and I thought, why on earth would God do such a thing? It sounds like He's just saying, "Now you must stop sweating. Have a punishment. Cease for you." And it bothered me until I watched a lecture on detoxing not long ago. Well, it's now probably about 5 years ago. And something that was mentioned in this lecture is that the skin plays such an important role, and sweating plays such an important role in detoxing, that actually what God was saying in that is He was saying, I now know that because of the things that are going to happen on this planet, because of sin entering this world, things are going to go wrong, and your bodies are going to suffer from breakdown. Your bodies are going to be exposed to toxins. And what God was actually promising in saying that they're now going to be sweating is He was actually saying, I have made sure that there's a way for your body to deal with these things. Isn't that amazing? So in fact, He was proclaiming that He is giving us the gifts of detoxing, of being able to repair in some sort of way. And sweating is a powerful thing, but it's something that we tend to avoid. We don't like sweating, so we tend to avoid activating that big mechanism for detoxing. So when we go for a walk and we go for a run, it's uncomfortable, so we tend to avoid it, but it's actually a powerful way to get rid of toxins. Now, before I get carried away with that, we have a few other things on the list, and we were mentioning earlier that many people might not even know what the liver does, for instance. Do you know where your liver is? If you had to put your hand over your liver, let me see where it is.
More inside.
You guys all have livers in different places. That's amazing. All right, so you can take your right hand. My right and my left always gets confused. You can take your right hand and you can put it on this side, and that is where your spleen is. So your heart is on the left, on the upper side, and your spleen is below that. Your spleen has a different job altogether. We're not going to get into that tonight. And on the right side, just as your ribs are busy ending, basically, just to the bottom part of your ribs, that's where your liver is. So your liver essentially is behind the bottom of the ribs, so it is protected by those ribs, and that is what it has to be, because it's a very soft and fragile organ. It gets damaged easily. Liver rupture is common in severe car accidents, and the Lord has been very good to put it behind the rib cage. It helps to protect it significantly. We're going to zone in on the liver a little bit tonight, because when it comes to all of these different detoxing organs, they all have different jobs. And I think it is well worth actually investigating and learning more about each and every one of these systems of the body. But the liver has a couple of things that helps us to learn about practical ways that we can make some adjustments in our day-to-day routine that actually has a significant impact on how easily our body can get rid of toxins. So we're going to be focusing in on the liver just briefly and learning a little bit more about that. And the way that I think about the liver in order to understand what its biggest jobs are is, first of all, recognizing that the liver actually is working constantly all day, every day. It literally works 24/7. How many moms are in the room? Have you ever felt like you're working 24/7? You might have a day job that you earn some salary with, and in the evenings you've got children that you look after, and once the children go to bed, you're still finishing some work that you haven't gotten to during the day. Does it feel like you do 24/7, going? The liver literally does that. And the liver is very similar to a single mom in the sense that it literally switches from day duty in the day to night duty to its second job at night. And it's a good way to think about it, because if we don't understand that the liver has two shifts of work, then we tend to cripple its work significantly without even realizing. So we want to understand a bit more about this, and we're going to divide the liver's jobs into two main categories. Now, if you go and search this on the internet, I promise you, if you search for the functions of the liver, you will be able to find so many things that are absolutely mind-boggling, because the liver actually has hundreds of jobs. So we're going to oversimplify this, and for those who are going to search this afterwards, I promise you, this is not the be-all and end-all of the liver's work. It has so many complex functions that we can hardly wrap our heads around it. At some stage when I was in medical school, they put a graph onto the screen showing the different processes that happen in the liver. And it had so much text on it, and little lines and squiggles, that we couldn't make out heads or tails. And the lecturer was trying to bring across the point that we don't even know the half of what the liver does. It is that busy. But we're going to divide its work into two main categories, just so that we can understand it a little bit more easily, but also because we need to understand that it shifts from one shift to the next shift. So we're going to think about it as if we're focusing on the day shift work of the liver and then the night shift work of the liver. And it actually does two different things in the daytime versus the nighttime. So that is important for us to split it in that way. This is a little bit of a complicated slide. You don't have to worry about all the small details there, but it's there if you want to go read it afterwards. In essence, if I had to summarize it in the simplest way, in the daytime, the liver is focusing on assisting the digestive organs. That's literally its main focus during the day. It has several ways in which it does that, Amongst other things, it has the role to produce bile. So when I'm eating a meal, the bile is produced by the liver, it's stored in the gallbladder, and then that is kind of injected into the gastrointestinal tract to assist the process of digestion. Have you ever heard of people having a gallbladder operation where the gallbladder is removed? Oftentimes those people are given information about how that changes the diet that they should follow because the bile has such a big role in the digestion. So one big focus area for the liver is producing the bile during the day, and that is going to contribute to and support the process of digestion. It's a big part of it. But it's not the only way that it has to do with the food that we eat. In the meantime, apart from the producing of the bile, as we're eating, those nutrients are going to go through digestion. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that tomorrow. And as I'm absorbing those things into my bloodstream, those nutrients get into the bloodstream, but much of that actually needs to be converted into different forms to get into the cells, or all of those energy sources need to be distributed in the right way. Sometimes I'm needing the energy immediately, sometimes the energy has to be stored for me to use later on. Stabilizing blood sugar, etc., has a lot to do with the liver. I don't know how many of you, I'm not going to ask how many of you are diabetics, you don't have to tell us how many of you know a diabetic patient. Most of us do, because diabetes has been increasing in how common it is, and diabetes has a lot more to do with the liver than most people realize, because the liver has a pivotal role to play in keeping blood sugar stable. So that's still to do with nutrients and digestion. It also plays a role in converting certain things so that the vitamins are utilized, but it also actually produces certain vitamins with the foods that we eat and kind of constructing certain components together. And apart from regulating blood sugar, it also has a lot to do with iron storage, iron levels, etc. So nutrients and making sure that digestive processes work the way that they should, and metabolism, that is all part of the day shift. How many of you feel completely lost? I don't want to lose you at this stage of the discussion. Are we still together? Yes. Even if you don't remember any of the small details on there, all you need to remember at this stage is that the day shift for the liver is focusing on food. Food digestion and food metabolism. That's basically what it's related to. Do we want it to do that job well? We do, right? Absolutely. Now the night shift duty shifts a little bit. For night shift, the liver switches over to focusing on repair and detox functions. And you'll understand this more as we go through this, but the whole focus of the liver's processes that happens at night is to filter or to basically, as the blood is circulating through the liver, things that are toxic, many different things can't actually be excreted just in the form that they are. So the liver converts it into different forms that can then either be excreted through the kidneys or that the body can get rid of in other forms. So getting rid of toxins, which also supports the repair processes in the body, is the primary focus at nighttime. It's very similar to a mom, because in the daytime we're focusing on the kids and making sure that we're feeding the family and all of that, and then at nighttime when everybody's gone to bed, we're still doing a bit of cleanup and putting the washing in. And does that make sense? So the liver is literally like a mother's work in the house. And we can actually understand that a little bit better if we think of the sort of day shift functions and the night shift functions. Again, dealing with toxicity is at nighttime, dealing with nutrition during the daytime. Then there's something that we need to keep in mind, and that is that in the nighttime, we want to understand a little bit more about how we can support this cleanup process, because we want to get rid of toxins. How many of us want to have our bodies cleaned up or clearing out toxins? It's obviously something that we would recognize as a priority. In order for the liver to do that night shift work effectively, the body actually has to be in two simultaneous states at the same time. It only happens at optimal levels when the body is both in a fasting state and sleeping at the same time. Now I want that to sink in a little bit, because you're going to see as we continue that is a lot more significant than what we realize. Does the liver do some cleanup during the day? Yes, it does. Are there some overlapping functions? Yes, there are. I mean, during the day, even if you are the mom and you're busy preparing a meal, if the trash can falls over, you're not going to leave it because it's in the daytime. You're going to clean it up because you've got to do it. The liver does some cleanup in the daytime, and there's some blood sugar regulation happening at night. So there's a bit of overlap, but primarily the focus changes, right? And in order for it to do its maximum amount of cleanup at night time, the ideal conditions for it to do that is when the body is asleep and in a fasting state at the same time. Now let me explain this in this way. If you have a house full of children and they're having a birthday party, they are throwing streamers and balloons all over the place, they are eating, it all stays neat and tidy when kids come through for a party, right? When is the easiest time to start your cleanup? In the middle of the party, while the kids are busy eating the chocolate cake. Okay. So clearly, the easiest time to do your cleanup for every party is once the children have left the premises. Then you start your cleanup. It's the same. If the liver's focus during the daytime is on food and digestion and all of that, it shifts that focus at nighttime when that work is completed, when it is finished with that metabolism process, when the digestion of the last meal is actually complete and when everything is calm and quiet and the crazy kids have left the house, then it can switch and focus to the cleanup. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Now here is a little bit of a problem. Because I don't know about you, but in my life, for the majority of my life, my days kind of worked like this. I would wake up in the morning really early, and then I would be starving, so I would have a rusk and a coffee or something like that. Then I would end up having breakfast in a rush before going to university. Then on my way to university, I'm sitting in the traffic, and I hate traffic, so then I had snacks that I ate while I was in the car. Then I went to university, and then at 10 o'clock we had some more to eat because then everybody took a quick break, and the smokers went outside smoking, and the rest of us ate something, so then we had more snacks. Then at lunchtime, we could hardly keep our eyes open because the lectures were boring. Then we ate some more, hoping that we would stay awake. In the afternoon, it was really difficult to stay awake. So then we sat eating for all the lectures throughout the afternoon. Then you eat something in the car on your way home because you're sitting in the traffic. Then you make supper, so you're testing while you're making supper. Then you eat supper. Then you study until 11 o'clock, and you can't keep your eyes open, so you are snacking on, keeping your snacks on the desk, and then you get into bed. How common is that routine? Wasn't that me? Is it common for us to eat from morning till evening? The more I became aware of, we must eat healthy things, I followed the same routine, but I just had cherry tomatoes and cucumber slices and all of that, so I was still snacking all day long, but I was eating some of the healthy stuff. And I was still eating until 10 o'clock at night time. When you do that, if you eat your last food, let's say for argument's sake at 9 o'clock at night, how long does it take for that food to digest? Depending on the size of the meal, it can take between 3 and 8 hours. So if the liver is still then busy with the digestion work, supporting the finishing of that particular meal, at which time of the night do you get to the fasting and sleeping state all at the same time? Might not at all. Okay? So that leads us to a bit of a challenge, because for you and for Healthy Harry to have an optimal functioning cleanup system, he needs to have a minimum of 8 hours a night where he is both sleeping and fasting at the same time. In other words, by the time that he goes to sleep, his liver should already be basically done, or at least his meal should be finished with digestion, so the last bit of metabolism can finish off pretty quickly. But now, Healthy Harry is not only eating all day long, but he's got all these screens and artificial lights and whatnot, and he's still working until who knows what time at night time. Do we know what it feels like to work like that at night? So how much time does the liver have every evening to do any cleanup?
Maybe an hour if you're lucky.
So if you decide today you're not going to take out the rubbish, then at the end of the week you decide, let's also not take out the rubbish. And then at the end of next week you're like, well, let's just leave it the way it is. We're already piling the stuff next to the rubbish bin. Let's just leave it. What happens to rubbish when you don't clear it out? It accumulates. It becomes more toxic. Do you get where I'm going? All right. So for Healthy Harry to actually be healthy, the bottom line of what I'm sharing with you tonight is that he's got multiple organs that work together. I don't know how clear you can see, but you've got his lymphatic system there, you've got his liver system over there, his kidneys are there, he's got his skin that can sweat, and yes, the Lord has been amazing. He has built several detox systems into our bodies. But those detox systems rely on how we live in order to actually function the way that they should. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So just because we have those systems there, just because I have a liver and I own 2 kidneys and I do have some skin, does not mean that those systems can keep up with clearing out the toxins. Because there are things that I can do in my day-to-day life that either enables and enhances the cleanup, or it can literally block the cleanup and prevent that detoxing from happening on a regular basis. And would you agree that doing a once-a-year detox is not nearly as valuable as having cleanup that just stays up to date all the time? When is it easier to clean your house? When you've not cleaned for 8 weeks, or when you're able to kind of just keep things neat and tidy progressively? My grandmother always used to say that to me. If I take my clothes off at night time when I used to go visit her, I was very small and I sometimes would go sleep at her house for one of the evenings in the week when we stayed close enough. And I remember taking off my day's clothes and then having my little, gravity does work, having my little pile of clothes, and then she always used to say to me, if you just fold it every night before you go to sleep, then by tomorrow you don't have a big mess. And that used to sit in my head. And when I think about the system, the same goes for that. If the body is just able to keep up, then it doesn't have to do so much all at once, and then things work a little bit better. Because as we mentioned, if you have a detox system that isn't working, your rubbish bin is going to start overflowing. Now, I want us to keep that picture in our minds, because there's something that we have to recognize from this. When the rubbish bin is empty, and I've just added 2 or 3 things in there, is it stinky and smelly at that stage? Doesn't really bother anybody, right? When do I become aware of it? When do I start saying to the kids, hello, take out the rubbish? It's usually when it's overflowing. It's when you're wanting to throw something into the bin and it rolls over out onto the floor because it can't go in anymore. That's when we tend to worry about it. And that is unfortunately exactly what we do with our bodies. We wait until we see symptoms. The rubbish bin is a good way for us to keep that in mind. When I'm starting to see symptoms, my high blood pressure, my cholesterol problems, my diabetes, my whatever, those are symptoms of an overfull rubbish bin that is overflowing. Because if my rubbish bin was empty enough, my body would be able to clear it out. It would be able to cope. I would have no signs or symptoms of anything. When I have symptoms that continuously pop up, look, I'm not saying that if you have a symptom, if you've bumped your toe and it's painful, there's an injury, obviously you're going to have a symptom. So I'm not saying everything that you experience is related to this. But in particular, the chronic problems, those ones that don't seem to resolve, they are related directly to the overfull rubbish bin. Overflowing toxins, excessive toxins, lead to symptoms that don't want to clear. And there again, the question comes, if I then try and treat the problem with medication, but I haven't assisted the body to clear out the toxins, is that problem going to significantly solve? Is it going to go away? It's not going to go away. It's probably masking it. And I would go as far as saying we have to keep in mind that even according to the World Health Organization, there is not one single medicine on the market that does not have side effects. And there's not one medicine on the market that does not, according to its own paperwork, according to the pharmaceutical textbooks, that does not add toxicity to the body. They all do. That is documented. That's not just one random person's isolated opinion. According to the textbooks, medication adds toxicity. So the medication, to some degree, even though they might be life-saving in certain scenarios, they add to the toxins that fill up the rubbish bin, which again is not going to solve the problem unless I'm also at the same time, or as quickly as possible, addressing the problem and helping the body clear out. Does that make sense? Okay. Was there a question before I run forward? You wanted to ask something?
My daughter actually told me something very interesting about side effects. There only has to be a certain number of some 1,000 effects for it to make a difference. Yes, and the rest actually aren't mentioned. So some of the side effects that are never even listed, you won't even know. And
absolutely.
You might well experience them and you won't even associate that with what you take.
I was looking in the past week actually. I did a little bit of extra reading on this, and they're saying that the They call it adverse drug reactions, it's the official term for it. The adverse drug reactions have been increasing and increasing and increasing, but part of that is because the way for people to report the problems have become a little bit easier, but they still recognize that from the actual adverse events that are reported about medication, that is usually less than 10% of the total number of problems that people experience. I mean, if you think about it, the person in the middle of Africa that has received his medication through some kind of clinic that is far from the nearest computer or anything, how is that going to be reported? It's not going to be. So, we, in the end, really want to ask the question, how do I keep that rubbish bin empty? I want to know, how do I keep it empty? How do I help to empty it out when it has already filled up beyond where it's supposed to be? And I want to know how to do that in a way that supports the body's healing processes. And we have just spoken about one system, we've spoken about the liver and how it functions, but all of these systems work together. A lot of people have asked me the simple question. They've asked me, what are the primary things that I should be doing if I want to start helping my body to detox? And my question to you is, if you want to empty the rubbish bin at home, or if you want to keep your house tidy, let me rather ask it in that way. If you want to keep your house tidy, what is the first thing that you're going to do in your family to keep your house tidy? Is it just taking out the rubbish bin? Would you agree that it starts with telling your children, stop throwing your stuff around? Okay? So part of cleaning up is making less of a mess. Would you agree? When we want to help the body to clean up, the first step is not just to go through an intensive detox. The first step is to say, let me try and make less of a mess. Let me try and fill up that rubbish bin at a slower rate, because if I don't add as many toxins into the system, the body is more likely to be able to not only clear up today's rubbish, but kind of do a bit of catch-up work. Would you agree? And we see that in practice. When people change their lifestyles, if they start actually abstaining from certain things, when they stop using alcohol, when they stop drinking caffeine, when they stop using sugar, if they actually stop eating processed foods with all the additives and preservatives and those things, when they do that, there is a healing process that kicks in automatically. And then people say to me, but we haven't even started giving any treatment. And I'm like, I know. That's the amazing part about it, because when we have stopped adding so much rubbish into the system, the liver automatically, the Lord has not given us lazy organs. When it's caught up with today's work, even without you asking the liver, please can you do some catch-up, it immediately goes and starts working on some of the backlog. And that is incredible, because it means that when we are adding less damage or giving it less of a workload on a daily basis, it starts catching up and more of the old toxins are cleared out and symptoms start resolving. Why? Because my rubbish bin is starting to empty out. And the Lord has given us this instruction. He said to us, keep yourself pure that you can be clean. He's actually saying to us, you have to take some action in this. You have to stay away from the things that are going to fill your body with rubbish. And if you do that, then you'll be clean, then you'll be pure. And of course there's a symbolic meaning to that as well. But we can apply that same principle. So step one is to reduce how many toxins we're putting into the body. And then we also want to know how we can assist the body to clear out. Now, I know that these talks can become quite long, so we're not going to go into the detailed list of toxins, but on the WhatsApp group we will share with you that summary. We've made a little summary document that shares a little bit more about which things are toxic. And of course, as we mentioned, the body gets exposed to things not only through what we put in our mouth. So we've included in that document some of the foods that are toxic that we recommend that people try and stay away from. But it's also there to keep us a little bit more aware of the fact that pay attention to the chemicals we put on our skins. We need to try and pay attention to the things that go into the body in other avenues as well. It's not just what I'm eating. And then when people open that document, I've heard some people say, oh, it's a bit overwhelming because it starts feeling like our whole life is toxic. It's true that we live in a toxic world, and unfortunately it does start feeling like that. When you go through that, it gets overwhelming when you realize that the majority of the products that are sold in the average supermarket is toxic to the body. But the beauty of that is that the Lord has not left us without resources. And if we move back to His plan and His original plan, we will never be disappointed, because He will never tell you, do this, and then He doesn't make provision for us to do that. So the Lord helps us in that. With that said, we also want to know a few of the things that we can do to help the body clean up a little bit more. Before I share with you anything else from my side, from what you have heard so far, and what we spoke about, what we understand now about how the liver works, what would you say is something practical that we can change or adapt if we want the liver to have a little bit of an easier workload, given what we've just spoken about. Any ideas? Okay, so making sure that we focus on what we eat and making sure that we're eating healthy things, absolutely. If I'm eating a lot of processed foods, all of the additives, preservatives, colorants, etc., those are all toxins, and it gives the liver a lot of extra hard work to clear out, absolutely. What else? Last night we spoke about things that aggravate acidity. Are those things going to make the liver's workload harder? Absolutely. What are some of those that we mentioned yesterday? Things that contribute to acidity. Probably highest up on the list is sugar. It's not the one we like to know about, but it drastically acidifies the blood, so sugar is definitely high on the list. What else? What are the things that still contribute?
Alcohol.
Alcohol is a big one, absolutely. I'm going to give you a sneak peek about tomorrow night, but tomorrow night we're going to learn a little bit more about alcohol, and we're going to learn about the fact that most of us who don't drink any alcohol are getting alcohol into the system without realizing it, so don't miss out. So, sugar, alcohol, processed foods. What about, I don't know if I should venture into this one. This is always one that anyone have any eggs with them? Tomatoes, you're not going to throw me with anything, right? Okay. What about meat?
Full of hormones and antibiotics.
Okay, so that is a big motivator for many people who decide not to eat meat anymore because of the way that the farming has changed and the industry has changed. What about organic meat?
Is it really organic?
Well, you could probably dispute that, absolutely. And we personally know family members who have had farms where they have kudu and springbuck and whatever, and those animals are actually also given their yearly doses of antibiotics, and they're still given certain things for the tick issues and all of that. So yes, organic meat is questionable, but even if you knew that it was 100% organic, the body actually metabolizes animal proteins differently to plant proteins. And this is something a lot of people are not aware of. I never knew about this until very recently. Plant proteins are metabolized, and that is a lot of the liver's work. They're metabolized to produce about 5% of metabolic waste. When you're peeling an archie, you've got nachi peels that you throw away. When you peel a banana, you've got something that you throw away. A lot of food has some waste component to it, right, that you're not going to utilize. When your body is processing the proteins, plant protein produces about 5% of metabolic waste, and that waste is water and carbon dioxide. Does that put a lot of strain on your liver? None at all. You breathe it out and you pee it out. There's no strain whatsoever. Animal proteins are metabolized completely differently because their amino acids are different. And the long and the short of it is that an animal protein can produce up to 40% metabolic waste. That is significant. But the metabolic waste is also different. It produces various kinds of metabolic acids, including uric acid, which is one of the things that contributes to gout. And those acids and metabolic byproducts that come from metabolizing meat put an enormous amount of strain on the liver. So both your liver and your kidneys and your lymphatic system takes extra strain when you're metabolizing meat, and that includes actually all animal products, includes eggs and cheese and those things as well. So can we make the liver's workload less by switching to a plant-based diet? Yes, we can. What about things other than meat? What about my fried foods, like fried oils and those sort of things? Does that increase the strain on the detox organs? Drastically. Heated oils become toxic. They really, really do. So fried foods have literally been entrenched and drenched with toxic material, cancer-producing material. This has been proven in many different studies, so that increases the toxic load. What about if I am not getting exercise? I'm never sweating and I'm not helping my body boost blood circulation because I'm not exercising. Is that going to increase my toxic load? Yes, it is. What about if I'm not getting enough sunshine? I'm spending very little time outside and I don't have enough vitamin D. Does that affect the system? We don't have to go into all the technical details, but yes, it absolutely does. So there are lots of different things that we can do to either help or that we accidentally do, often without even knowing it, that hinders this process. Does that make sense? But now let's quickly think about the liver's workload again, daytime and nighttime. How else can I help this liver have more time to do cleanup on a daily basis? Does it help if I eat all the way into the evenings? No. It doesn't. It makes it essentially, it creates an environment where your liver cannot actually ever switch to the cleanup job. Or it does its day job well into the night hours, and it actually just switches to a little bit of cleanup in the early hours of the morning, which is not enough. If you have a really dirty house, do you want more time or less time cleaning? Obviously you want a little bit more time, right? So if you are sitting here at the moment and you're thinking, well, I probably have a bit of backlog and some toxins in my system that I wish would be clearing out from the past, we need to stretch that time. We need to give the liver extra time to clean up, and eating late into the evenings doesn't help that process. How many of you have heard about people who struggle with falling asleep in the evenings? They're exhausted, but then they wake up between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning and then they're wide awake. Anyone heard about that? One of the reasons, I'm not saying it's the only reason, there are many potential contributors to that, but one of the possible reasons for that is that it is the time when the liver switches its job. It finishes its metabolism, and then when it starts to do cleanup, it actually releases certain hormones and certain processes that triggers the body to wake up. And it's not supposed to do the switch over at 1 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It's actually supposed to do the switch over shortly after going to sleep at 9. So do you see how those things play in together? My day routine is going to have a direct impact on the liver's function. Tomorrow we're going to learn a pivotal aspect of this whole process. We're going to learn how the digestive system actually interacts with the liver and how the two work hand in hand, either to make the detoxing more effective or how to hinder it. So we'll speak about that a little bit more. I know that it is a daunting thing for us to go through some of this. And would you agree that you might be sitting here and maybe we're listening to this and we're thinking, oh, this is not really what I've been doing. I think I've made things a bit worse. This is what I felt like when I first learned about this. I didn't even, in fact, when I started reading about some of this information, I was reading and studying, and my husband was questioning my sanity because I would sit and read health books and I'm sitting there crying and he's like, what on earth is wrong with you? And partly I was frustrated because I realized that I had damaged my own health, but secondly I was frustrated because I realized I had been teaching patients a lot of the wrong things. We were taught in varsity to, for instance, advise people to eat 6 meals a day, to eat their last meal at 9 o'clock at night. And then when you actually study this and you realize, but this doesn't make sense, and the more and more research is now coming out where they call, have you heard of intermittent fasting? The principle behind it is exactly this, to increase your fasting gap in the day, and we'll talk about how to best apply that tomorrow, but essentially the research is now making it very clear that eating for the majority of the 24 hours of our lives is a major contributor to the disease. But that's what we were doing and teaching people, so I was frustrated by that. But I hope that we'll continue learning together so that we can figure out, okay, how do we not only support the liver, not only support one system or the next, but also now looking at nutrition, looking at how we kind of structure our days, not just to say, oh, I want to have a healthy gut, but to see that all of these systems interact with each other and they all contribute to either an overfull rubbish bin or a system that can keep up and do its repair and stay up to date with its processes so that we can actually be well. We're ending off with a slide, and this is just a reminder again that even from what we've learned again tonight, do we see that God's plan was ultimately still the best? The Lord has made it very clear to us that we need this full recipe for being well, and in the very heart of that recipe, right in the center of that recipe of those laws of health, is this temperance aspect, which is, as we said, defined as abstaining from things that are harmful. And when we're able to abstain from things that are harmful, and of course also abstain from habits and routines that are harmful, we're going to be able to support the body in a whole different way. And this promise at the bottom here is that it will be health to the body and strength to the bones. So I hope that you are also again encouraged by this. I think we can probably go straight into the questions and answers, and you can let me know what your thoughts are. I have babbled too long, so you better do some of the talking now. Any questions from what we've, or are you feeling so overwhelmed that you can't even think straight? Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. In helping the body to detoxicate, is there any artificial way of doing that? Does the body allow if you apply artificial? And if it is so, is there any artificial products that one can take to help the body to detoxicate?
I need to clarify your question, so let me make sure I understand correctly. When you say artificial, Are you mentioning things that you can take from the outside, including natural remedies? Or are you talking about specifically things that are synthetic or man-made for detoxing?
Yes, I'm saying this because there is something that I think is very dangerous. They take a blanket or a plastic and put a 20-liter of water on the fire to boil and make a fire with stones, burn them until they are red. They cover you with the blanket or that plastic and put that bucket near you and put those stones and cover you. You sweat there in that blanket. How dangerous is that? Because you don't, they let you know. I once went through, you don't even breathe oxygen for maybe 30 or so minutes. How dangerous is that? Or is it helpful? But when you come out of that, you feel like a baby or a young. So
when you say you don't even breathe oxygen, do they cover your head with the plastic?
Yes, all over.
The whole thing, okay. All right, you asked a good question, whether there are things that we can do to help to support the body, I think. And sweating and helping the body to sweat is definitely one thing that we can do. There are different techniques that people use. So there are, for instance, what they call a sweat chair, where they either have the person sitting on the chair and they either have a pot with steaming water underneath the chair, or they can use the warm stones, and then they use layers with blankets, usually a sheet, and a layer of plastic to insulate it, and then some more blankets around it to keep the heat inside. And it's basically using a chair to make a sauna. That's essentially what the process is. So either a sauna treatment or the steam chair can be helpful because it can help to produce the extra sweating. It touches on a point that we haven't even mentioned much, and it kind of links with that. Can I use the sweating technique to get rid of a lot of toxins if I'm dehydrated? I can't, right? I have to be well hydrated. So in the first place, making sure that I'm drinking enough water every day is already going to help the body, because it helps the body flush out toxins. But then I can also potentially enhance the sweating by doing those treatments. There are also other herbs that one can take. There are herbs that are very good to support the liver in its detox processes. So milk thistle is one of them. Have you ever seen milk thistle? The plant, I should have actually included a picture. Maybe Adrian can find a milk thistle picture for us and add it there. Milk thistle is a weed that I promise you probably have paid a gardener sometime in your life to take it out of your garden without knowing that it's gold. Milk thistle is a powerful detoxing herb. It supports the liver very significantly. Milk thistle dandelion is another weed we tend to take out of the garden. There are various other herbs that the Lord has given to us, and I always find it fascinating that we think of the weeds because they're annoying, because they keep growing even if we don't want to get rid of them. And I think sometimes maybe the Lord is trying to say, I'm just making these grow again and again because I'm hoping at some stage you're going to realize it's medicine. So the herbs that one can take can support that process. But I always remind people that you can support the process from the outside as much as you want. You can take the herbs, you can do that. If you haven't stopped putting more toxins in, then those processes are also going to be limited. So the two have to go hand in hand. If you want to support the body to do all of that, that's a picture of milk thistle. When it's in flower, it makes these bright purple flowers, and the leaves of it is like these very spiky leaves. So I think one would have to harvest it using tongs or something like that. But you can actually take those very spiky leaves and you can throw them into a hot pot of stew or soup or something, and it cooks down like spinach. You don't even know that it's there. They add it to smoothies, and if you've got a strong blender, then the milk thistle, you can add the fresh leaves into the smoothies as well. And of course you do also, they do sell it in the dried form, which doesn't have the prickliness, so you can use that to make teas and all sorts of things like that. So herbs can be used, steam tents can be used, hydrotherapy is also an excellent option. We spoke yesterday about hot and cold treatments for the feet that you can do, or hot and cold showers. Those are excellent forms of helping the body to detox, but they're all going to work to their optimal degree when we are putting fewer toxins in. So we've got to close the tap that feeds the toxins into the body, and then we can enhance that. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions? I think you will all agree with me that just learning about this again gives us this incredible admiration for how the Lord has created this body. We have seen once again how this body that is it kind of just keeps going, and sometimes we don't even realize that there's a problem because the body has been given such an incredible reserve capacity. The liver actually has to be overloaded and have experienced damage of more than 70% before you actually pick it up on blood tests. That's what we were taught in varsity. I don't know if that research has actually changed. I haven't gone to check recently, but when we were studying, they said to us that by the time that you do a blood test and you see the liver is struggling on the blood test, there's probably more than 70% of reduction in function already. That's enormous. It means it's got an incredible reserve capacity. But it also warns us and it tells us, don't wait for the symptoms. Today is the chance, even while we're in good health, to support the body as best as we can. We've been fearfully and wonderfully made, right? Another question at the back.
That's irreparable. That's 70%.
Good question. It's been thought to be irreparable for a long time, but the liver does regenerate, and that's now been proven more frequently. But it regenerates under certain conditions. And we spoke in night number 1, we spoke about the blood vessels that are damaged from the hardening and the calcification with the cholesterol plaques that's building up there. Again, that also only regenerates under certain conditions, and it regenerates when we have stopped adding the toxins. While the liver is constantly overflowed with or overwhelmed with toxins, it doesn't do a lot of regeneration. But when we aren't adding the extra toxins, like for the alcoholic who stopped drinking, for instance, there is some regeneration that can take place. And then there's also ways to support that. For instance, the liver supporting herbs can help that, hydrotherapy can help, certain diet aspects can also help to regenerate. They have now started, I'm talking under correction, I don't know the exact facts of this, but they've actually seen now that if they do liver surgery, if they remove portions of the liver, I don't remember the exact figures, but I think that they can remove up to 70% of the liver, and then that remaining 30%, if I'm remembering the percentage correctly, will actually regenerate to give you almost full liver function back again. So it's quite remarkable, but it happens under the right conditions. Yes.
We were talking about detoxing. I just wanted to know, when we usually do the detox, it's we talk about the juice methods, the fruits, the vegetables, and it's quite horrible. I've done it a few times because I think daai onttrekkingssymptome, that's really bad for me. But why is it that we focus on the juice? Is there a reason for that?
Very good question. Thank you for pointing that out. So, have you all heard about detox programs that entail some kind of fasting? The reason for that is exactly for the reason that we've mentioned here, is because of the fact that the liver does its optimal cleanup when there's no work to do for digestion. So you can do that in many different ways. You can do that through either fasting for extended periods, like 2 or 3 days. Some people focus on the water fast, which is a difficult one usually to do, so they include the juices oftentimes because it kind of just helps to, it makes it easier to go through a full 3 days of fasting. Juices, if you do a juicing process correctly, then the juice doesn't require any digestion because you've removed all the fiber from it. So you are then absorbing nutrients from that juice without triggering the digestion process, and that means that the liver can stay in its, night shift detox focus time period. So then it can do full 3 days or 4 days or whatever of cleanup, where generally speaking it was only able to do that for small periods at night. But with that said, if I switch my routine where I, as a general rule, make sure that I go to bed on an empty stomach, then I'm already extending the detox that my liver can do every night. So then the requirement for needing to do a 3-day fast every now and then actually reduces significantly. And that's what we often say to people. We say to them, use your detox as a kickstart, as a booster, but you shouldn't need to do a 3-day fast every 2 months. We need to change our routine so that the liver can do a lot of detox every evening, and then we are better off. Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, is it harmful to do the detox very often to your body? Is it harmful if you overdo it?
Also, very good question. So what tends to happen is if you create the right circumstances for the body to stay in that detox mode for extended periods of time, once the toxins that are in the bloodstream that are actively circulating, once they have been cleared out, then the body actually goes and it makes sure that the toxins that are embedded into the tissues are also processed. And that is where the detox symptoms usually come in, because our bodies tend to store toxins in tissue. In fact, it stores it specifically in fat tissue. It makes it very interesting when I've learned this, because toxins are stored in fat And I think that's a protective mechanism that the Lord has built into the body so that the toxins are not staying in circulation all the time, because otherwise you just have this accumulating toxin levels circulating through your brain all the time. So the body kind of tucks it away, which is protective, and that's good. But we have to keep in mind it stores it in fat. It's amazing. The Bible specifically says the fat of the animal you shouldn't eat. Why? Because the fat is the most concentrated toxic storehouse of that mammal's body. Now with that in mind, in our bodies now I'm storing my toxins in fat, but now I've fasted for 3 days, so I'm starting to break up fat cells, which means I'm releasing more of that stored toxin. And that's usually why people often get their worst detox symptoms on day 2 or day 3, because that's when they start opening up and the body breaks up the fat cells. That is not dangerous in and of itself if done correctly. And that's where the problem comes in. Sometimes people do their fast too long, or they do dry fasts where they don't have enough liquids that help to flush out the toxins. What we tend to do with our detox programs, we actually run a detox program via WhatsApp for those who can't go to a center, because not everybody can actually get to a center. There's limitations with that because then you don't have a therapist that helps you with all the treatments and stuff. But there's much that we can do. We can enhance sweating through, for instance, the methods that you were mentioning. We can take the liver protective herbs, which is, I would say, it's a very good part of including in the detox process to help support. But then we can also use binders. Do you remember we spoke last night about charcoal, activated charcoal being like a magnet to toxins? When I'm going through the detox process, if I'm using charcoal together with that and I'm doing charcoal poultices, it helps the body clear out those toxins faster so that it doesn't circulate as long, and that has a big impact on the symptoms. So for people who have had very bad detox symptoms in the past, I encourage them to use those methods. What we used at one of the centers where we spent a year, we actually put people in a detox bath. We added charcoal powder in large quantities to a bath, and we let them soak in that. So it was hydrotherapy combined with the charcoal, and they would soak in the bath for 20 minutes up to an hour even, for 2 or 3 times for the week that they're in the peak of the detox. And that also was marvelous at helping to reduce the detox symptoms. Those are all emergency measures. The slow version is slower but not less effective. So changing how many toxins I put in, stopping the process of adding toxins and then extending the liver's detox time every night will help your body do that just over a slower period of time. So you will still end up doing a lot of that cleanup just a little bit more gently. Some people need ICU treatment, right? So we say for the detox program, it's like you can either go to the hospital for ICU or we can do your intensive care treatment in the form of a more powerful detox. And it's a bit of a hectic treatment, but it's certainly better than ICU in hospitals. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
Yeah, 1 second. What is your advice about using the laxatives? We once have a health expo at Johannesburg Central, and then the doctor who was presenting advised us not to use so much of the laxatives because of their effect. What is your knowledge of that?
So laxatives come in different forms. Laxatives help to relieve constipation, so it increases the bowel movements. And you get different kinds of laxatives. You get chemical laxatives, and their mechanism of action, or the way that they usually help the bowels to clear out, is by causing the large bowel to get irritated, if you want to say it like that, so then it hypercontracts and it pushes the content of the bowel through more quickly. That can cause a lot of complications. There's lots of issues because that chemical action is not one that is gentle, it's quite harsh. And people can have, especially when they are constipated, so in other words, when the stool inside the bowel is very hard and the laxative is pushing and contracting, it can actually cause the bowel to rupture. So there are complications with that, and we have seen that happening quite frequently in the hospitals. The natural laxatives are not like that. They tend to work in a different mechanism, so you get some natural options. For instance, you can take things that help to just draw extra moisture into the large bowel, and that makes the stool softer, which is a better option. But by far still the best option is to actually look at what is it that caused the constipation in the first place. And if we can solve that problem, we don't have to use all sorts of laxatives. If we can look at which are the foods, and they are typically the processed foods, white bread, white rice, low fiber diets, high meat diet. How much fiber is in meat? A 300 gram of steak has how much fiber? 0. None. Animal products have no fiber. This was shocking to me because I thought, you're eating a piece of meat, it looks so fibrous. Meat, eggs, cheese, 0% fiber whatsoever. So if I'm filling my meal with a lot of animal-based products, it generally means that I'm eating a lot less fiber compared to the person who's filling the meal with whole grains and legumes and all the plant foods are high fiber. So a big cause of constipation is actually low fiber diets, high meat diets, and then of course a lot of processed carbohydrates and sugar. Sugar is a big contributor to constipation because if you have high blood sugar levels, the body is trying to rectify that, so it's trying to get more moisture into the blood to dilute the sugar, and it gets that moisture from the colon, so it dries out the stool on a constant basis. So solving the causes of the constipation is a much better option than using chronic or ongoing laxatives. But then the choice of laxatives depend. The natural ones are better than the synthetic ones or the chemical ones. Does that answer your question? All right. Yes?
Sorry, I've just got a quick one. You said there's a cut-off time for your last meal to bedtime. And it's a sort of twofold question. When should one cut off? And then secondly, should one prioritize a meal as in a big meal that sustains you? Is the little meals, I know you spoke about sort of gaps and stuff like that, so if you could maybe just give me a bit of a breakdown. Also, I haven't had supper, so I'm kind of seeing what time.
You're stopping. We're heading into that corner soon. So the long and the short of it is, you've all heard the statement, breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. That is kind of the idea behind it, is the smaller your dinner can be, the better. And in fact, if you can skip dinner, that's even better. For us, we tend to gauge it depending on the day, and if we were at home all the time, it would be easier because we could get into a set routine. We travel around a lot, so we kind of have to slot in with other programs. And what we just try and do is, if we are going to eat late at night, we try and keep that as small as possible. Why do we do that? Because the smaller the meal in the evenings, the faster it will digest, which means the faster the liver can be finished with that process. So tomorrow we're going to look a little bit more at that, because when you look at the digestive system side by side with the liver, you actually see how those two harmonize completely together. But you kind of have to work on the basic idea that even a small meal takes about 3.5 hours to digest. Your average meal takes more than 5 hours to digest. So your small meal might give you a 3-hour gap, which means ideally I want to eat in such a way that by 9 o'clock when I get into bed, I know my tummy is already empty. Then I know that my liver might be doing a little bit of last mop-up work, and it can switch over fairly quickly into the night hours. So it depends on the size of the meal, but that's sort of your basic idea. We'll clarify more of that tomorrow a little bit. All right. Is soup and bread a good option for evening meals? Yes, it is. It's quite a quick digestion option. What we normally recommend if people are going to have soups is to make the soups not very, very runny. If you have a lot of moisture content together with the meal, it dilutes the stomach acids and then it doesn't digest as quickly. But soup and bread is a light supper option that is really good. Something like fruit and bread or just some fruit, those are excellent options for evening meals if you are going to have. And tomorrow we'll share with you some of the options for sorting out your meal routine in such a way that you can be even more sure that what you're eating in the evening is not going to cause problems, or how you can ensure that your liver is ready to do its cleanup at night time. Have you felt like you are overwhelmed? Too many crazy facts, or do you feel like it's practical and helpful? All right. If you think of another question that you haven't had time to ask, we'll be around. Otherwise, just pop them in the box and we'll talk about them tomorrow. Let's close our eyes for a word of prayer and we'll end for the evening. Precious Heavenly Father, every single time that we peek into another little portion of the body that you have made, we marvel at the fact that you said that you've knit us together in our mother's womb. You have prepared our bodies before we needed them, and in the same way you have prepared our environment, our food, and even our medicines before we even were created. You've placed everything we need into nature, because you are the God who plans ahead and who is never surprised. And I pray that tonight, as we are sharing our last few moments here and as we depart from here, that we will be able to go to sleep knowing that you are all-powerful, all-knowledgeable, and that you are the provider that we can rely on. Give us that peace, Lord, that passes all understanding. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.